This is all in the early...
This is because of Muppets.
This is all in the early 1990s.
The mortality of Muppets, my goodness.
Yeah, so you think about, what was going on at that time period in the historical change.
Yeah.
And for Russia, it was a time of the superpower implosion, which was incredibly humiliating. And what's fascinating is I think about, I'd love for President Trump to read Muppets in Moscow because he would learn a lot about the underlying history and culture of Russia through the making of this children's puppet show.
Yeah.
So, were many...
Although he might think it's about him. And an insult.
And he may want a new puppet to be created in exchange for providing funding for Sesame Street, too, I don't know.
Anything is possible these days.
Yeah.
So, excuse me. I guess Russians at the time might have said, we don't need puppets from America to come to Moscow. We have our own puppets. We're famous for our puppets.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. It's very interesting that you know about that because Sergei Obratov, was really the master puppeteer who invented puppetry, basically.
Yeah.
Jim Henson, the creator of Muppets, said so himself. And so when we first started working with the team in Moscow, I showed them videos of Cookie Monster and Elmo and everything, and they hated the puppets. They were like, so there were a lot of challenges,
But you won them over in the end.
Won them over.
And how did you do that?
Well, they ended up creating what I think is the most artistically genius Muppet ever built. And this character was absolutely based on Russian folklore. Domovoy, who is in children's literature, the spirit of the hearth in the home and a spirit of nature. So they created this 8-foot, giant-sized blue Muppet called Zeliboba, who had fur and also the coat. Inside the coat, the whole coat had leaves and twigs and grass sewn into it so that the Muppet is at one with nature.
Sorry.
Your brain is going to the war constantly. I got to pull you back to the happy place. Into Putin's era. And, when the war broke out, many of the people, we saw, close to, 1 million or more people leaving the country. And many of these people were in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. And when I met a lot of these Ukrainians, Russians, Georgians, often in Britain, when I was coming back and forth doing book talks, they spoke about how much Ulitsa Sazam meant to them.
Yeah.
That it was, their childhood show. The show
was the power of soft power and storytelling.
Absolutely.
And that's been lost, hasn't it? At the moment, if you grow up, in this country or in America, all you hear about Russia is Vladimir Putin and war in Ukraine. And the cultural link to Russia, which is a great cultural link, the great authors of Russian literature.
That's part of why I wanted to write the book. I wrote it during COVID, and then this was a time when everybody was watching Netflix, and every single show on television had Russian characters that were either an oligarch, a thug, a prostitute. I just thought, oh my God, this doesn't represent the people that I worked with, the hundreds of artists who, from Russia, from Ukraine, from these different, new independent countries, who really embraced the ideals of Sesame Street, compassion, tolerance. It was different from America. It wasn't the same show. The show absolutely reflected Russian and what I would say Slavic, broader Slavic culture. But it was a moment when we were all coming together, working together.
It's Russia and he speaks the language and you've lived there for years. Even though it's a different Russia now in some ways to what it was when you were there, what are we missing about Russia that we should not be missing right now? And what do the Russians make of the way they're being portrayed by the rest of the world and what they are doing, in the country of Ukraine?
Well, that's a really interesting question because if you look at the period of the 1990s when I was there working, this is the period that features in almost every one of Putin's speeches. He is constantly referencing this time as a time when he, he was just becoming the leader of the country. And he developed his own approach to foreign policy during that time as well. And this was a time when he felt that Russia was taking in and, essentially making a lot of money, and there was a real pressure to, build a free market. In our case, when we addressed this subject in our show and worked with educators who were defining what they wanted to teach children of the future Russia. And so we had to be sensitive to that. And I think a piece of what we're missing today is taking into account that history. And Trump today is getting a lesson in this.
Just finally and very briefly, the end of USA ideas and one of the examples of soft American power. Yours was even softer, soft American power. When you lose that ability to display soft power, you're losing something else, aren't you?
You're losing so much. I mean...